Now, when French traders picked out that perfect spot on the bluffs for their new post, St. Louis, they weren't stepping into some empty wilderness, not at all. They were actually building on top of a landscape that had been shaped by a much, much older civilization. This place was once covered with hundreds of massive earthwork mounds, the last traces of a huge, sprawling city.
Which, brings up a really important question. If this wasn't empty land, who were the people who actually built this mound city?
Well, the answer takes us way back into the history of the Osage Nation. Long before any European flag was ever planted here, their ancestors, who were part of this incredibly sophisticated Mississippian culture, had called this region home for over 1,000 years. They were the architects of those mounds. They were people with deep, sacred connections to this exact piece of land.
Okay, so let's start with the first of our two towns. Let's look at Ste. Genevieve, a place that was, at its very core, all about the land.
St. Genevieve was founded around 1750, making it Missouri's first permanent European settlement. And the French Canadians who came here, they came for one main reason. The soil in the Mississippi floodplain was just unbelievably fertile. They called it Le Grand Champ, the big field. They grew so much wheat and corn that they basically became the breadbasket for colonies all the way downriver in New Orleans. Now, ironically, their neighbors up in St. Louis would later give the town the nickname Misère, which means misery, maybe a little inside joke about their rustic farming focus.
And you can still see the town's unique character today, preserved in its architecture. Ste. Genevieve has one of the largest collections of French colonial buildings in all of North America. And these are not the kind of log cabins you might be picturing. Nope, they built things very differently.
So what made their methods so unique? Well, get this. Instead of stacking logs horizontally, like you'd expect, they stood them straight up, vertically. This created these incredibly sturdy, timber-framed walls. This vertical log style, they called it poteau, is a total hallmark of French colonial building in the Mississippi Valley.
You can really see how it works here in this drawing. The logs make this solid, vertical frame, and then they'd fill in the gaps with a mix of clay and grass. It was a really durable, really practical design, just perfect for the region and the materials they had.
But living in that amazing floodplain came with a serious price. In 1785, a catastrophic flood, we're talking one of the biggest in recorded history, completely swamped the original town. But in this incredible show of resilience, the entire community just packed up and moved. They moved their whole town, sometimes piece by piece, 3 miles away to higher ground, which is right where it still is today.
All right, now for our second settlement. And if St. Genevieve just sort of grew out of the soil, St. Louis was a straight-up, calculated business venture from day one.
I mean, just listen to this quote from Auguste Chuteau. He was just a teenager when they founded the city, and he's recalling what his stepfather, Pierre Leclade, said. This captures the sheer scale of their ambition. Leclade wasn't looking for a little farm plot. He was scouting for the perfect spot to build a commercial empire. He was already seeing the future.
And St. Louis was that spot. Founded in 1764, its location was perfect. It was positioned to control all the trade on the Mississippi and, this is key, the Missouri rivers. But here's the thing, this was only possible because they had a vital partnership with the Osage Nation, who were the dominant power in the region. The French didn't create the fur trade, they just tapped into the huge network that the Osage already controlled, becoming these key business and military allies. The focus was so intense on trade that farming was a total afterthought, which earned the new town the nickname Pain Court, or Short of Bread.
So let's just put them side by side for a second. You've got Ste. Genevieve growing organically from its farming roots, and then you have St. Louis, this planned commercial hub built entirely on the fur trade. One gets called Misère, the other Pain Court. Just two completely different visions for what life on the frontier could be, and they were established just a few miles apart.
Now, just to make this early history even more complicated, there was this major political shift happening in the background. A shift so big that the founders themselves didn't even know about it at first. Okay, so the politics here were a tangled mess. In 1762, France secretly signs over all its territory west of the Mississippi to Spain. But, news traveled pretty slowly back then. So when Leclede and Chuteau founded St. Louis in '64, they thought they were doing it for the French king. It actually took another 3 years before the first Spanish officials finally showed up to take charge. Imagine that!
And here's the really fascinating part. Even though the whole region was officially Spanish for almost 40 years, its heart stayed completely French. The language people spoke, the customs, the culture, it was all French. So you had Spanish governors, but the people of Ste. Genevieve and St. Louis were living a French life.
So what does this all add up to? How did these two very different towns end up shaping the future of Missouri?
Well, ultimately, their two distinct identities created the state's foundation. St. Genevieve established that powerful agricultural pillar, proving just how valuable the land was. And St. Louis built the commercial pillar, making the region a true center of trade. Together, they really did set the stage for the Missouri we know today.
But the story doesn't just stop with those two pillars. That deeper history, the one we talked about at the very beginning, the one that's literally written in the earth itself, that story is still unfolding right now.
So what's with the number 2025? Well, that's the year the Osage Nation, after a 17-year fight, successfully reacquired Sugarloaf Mound, the very last surviving ancient mound in the city of St. Louis. A piece of the original mound city is finally back in the hands of the descendants of its builders.
Which kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. When we look at a city or a town, we usually only see its most recent chapter. But knowing the full story, the ancient mounds, the competing colonial visions, and the enduring presence of its very first people, that changes how you see everything. It's a powerful reminder that the past is never really past.